Dear colleagues, dear guests, it is a great pleasure to be among friends and close allies tonight with whom we share the same vision. A vision far broader than economic cooperation and convergence among the economies of Europe and the Mediterranean. A vision for a lasting, peaceful and mutually beneficial coexistence of all the European and Mediterranean nations. This museum, by the way, it was voted the best museum last year, so I keep this in mind. So this museum is dedicated to the monuments of the Acropolis of Athens, which have a history of 2,500 years, a history of which we Greeks are very proud of. Yet these monuments and other similar ones, such as the hundreds of cultural UNESCO World Heritage Sites, symbolize not just the greatness of the civilizations which created them, but also the greatness of our common human civilization. In fact, knowing that this hall is full of finance ministers and central bank governors who appreciate numbers and statistics, I would like to share with you the following fact. In the 42 states that have been invited to participate in tonight's dinner, which account for 1/4 of the 160 UNESCO World Heritage State parties, lie almost half of the cultural World Heritage sites. That is, I believe, a non-scientific, yet representative sign of the intensity, the diversity, and the density of the history of Europe and the Mediterranean. Bearing this in mind, an interesting question arises. What are the conditions that enable a civilization to flourish and create the masterpieces that comprise our common cultural heritage? A more thorough approach of all these amazing monuments and the historical framework within which they were created can help us draw some valuable conclusions. In general, and according to economic historians, the conditions that foster cultural developments are, first, political stability, second, peaceful relations with neighbor civilizations, third, sustainable economic growth combined with extensive trade relations with other cultures, and fourth, a sound level of social cohesion. The coexistence of these complementary conditions, in most cases, permitted the emergence of the most noteworthy intellectual, scientific, technological, and artistic accomplishments of humanity. At this point, I would like to ask you the following question. Aren't these conditions, that is peace, political stability, economic growth, and social cohesion, after all, the goals of the European Union, the biggest international democratic project in history? Indeed they are. And that is the reason we are here tonight, to confirm once more our common commitment to a more peaceful and prosperous future for the European nations and our close neighbors. Greece is fully dedicated to the European idea. To remind you that since 2010, we have been implementing economic adjustment programs agreed between us and the European Commission, the ECB, and the IMF in order to address our major problems, the twin deficits, the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. And 4 years later, we have accomplished a lot, and much sooner than expected, of course, with your valuable support. In 2013, Greece achieved one of the highest primary budget surpluses in Europe, exceeding 1% of GDP, compared with a target of 0, and a current account surplus for the first time since 1948. In cyclically adjusted terms, the adjustment is unique in global fiscal history. I have looked at the numbers. It's unique. By doing so, not only we contributed to the efforts of the Eurozone to overcome its stability problems, but we also proved our commitment to the European ideals of unity, solidarity, and harmony. Moreover, we contributed to the stability of the broader Mediterranean era. The man behind this unprecedented economic accomplishment, for those who don't already know it, inaugurated also this museum in July 2009 in his former capacity as the Minister of Culture. He's a person whom I have to thank because he supported me constantly and passionately through the difficult effort of the last 2 years. Believe me, it is not an easy task to be a finance minister of this country. He also happens to be the key speaker of this evening. I'd like to invite the Greek Prime Minister, Antonis Samaras, to take the floor.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a real honor to have you as very distinguished guests here tonight. I'm deeply moved to welcome you at a place heavily loaded with history and symbolism. Just across the street, you can see the Parthenon, an eternal monument of freedom, harmony, and democracy. A few meters beneath it, on the roots of the hill, you can see the site of the ancient theater of Dionysus, the place where drama was born, where Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides competed with their plays. On the other side stands the Pnyx, the famous hill where Pericles gave his inspiring speeches to the assembly of the Athenian citizens. On the northwest side, the rock of Varios Pagos is located, where Apostle Paul introduced the Athenians to Christianity, starting his quest to spread the new religion all over Europe. Wherever you may turn your face, your eyes will see battle sites where ancient Athenians and more recent Greeks fought fiercely for their freedom. Just at the east edge of the Acropolis hill, you can see the Greek flag during the first days of the Nazi occupation of Athens in May 41. 2 young Greeks brought down the Nazi flag in a daring act, bringing hope to the Athenians and heralding the Greek resistance against the occupation. A resistance that was bloody and relentless until the withdrawal of the Nazi groups 3 years later. Whatever the Greeks did in the passage of history, this area where we stand tonight has always been at the epicenter of fighting, at the epicenter of debating, performing, or constructing monuments of aesthetics, logic, and philosophy. Whoever they were fighting against, foreign invaders, hordes of bandits, or sometimes even among themselves, they always protected the Acropolis. And they more or less managed well for centuries, until Francesco Morosini came along in 1687 and bombed the besieged Ottoman troops on the Acropolis, causing a devastating explosion that brought Parthenon to ruins. And even then, the remaining parts were preserved, well preserved for another 150 years, until another vandal came along, Thomas Bruce, Earl of Elgin, taking away more than half of the sculptures. Some of them, he picked them up from the ground. Some of them, he tore them down from the temple itself. Since then, the most emblematic world monument of classical civilization remains mutilated. Since then, the marbles on the Acropolis are calling for the return of the missing marbles. Since then, my country is trying to achieve the reunification of the Parthenon. A few years after Elgin's looting, the Greeks revolted against the Ottoman rule and gained their independence. But the stolen marbles are always missing from the site and from our hearts. About 1.5 miles due west, we have the site of Plato's Academia. About 1 mile due northeast, we have the site of Aristotle's Lyceum. About 1/2 mile due southeast, we have the remnants of the Olympian Zeus temple next to the old city gate, constructed during the days of the Roman Emperor Hadrian. And just 20 miles to our north, to the north, we have Marathon, the most ancient battlefield of freedom against subjugation, won by free citizens fighting for their dignity. Dear friends, this is a sacred ground indeed, and obviously not for the Greeks alone. In a few square miles, we have world history and culture condensed, where epic and drama echo jointly in centuries of politics and warfare, aesthetic excellence and rhetorical eloquence, philosophical reasoning and mathematical deduction. This is the birthplace of a unique experiment, a starting point of human endeavor that has become truly universal since then and is indeed the cornerstone of our modern societies. This is the place where members of a community rose to the status of a city, self-governed by its own rules, where culture was not a luxury for the few, but a necessity for all citizens, where being able to fight was not an obligation to the ruler, but a duty to the city, where people gathered in the agora, in the marketplace, not only to buy or sell goods and services, but also to exchange views on everyday issues, as well as on internal existential questions of the human mind. In other words, this is the place where democratic legitimacy and democratic tradition has been born. Now, democracy is more than a political system. It is a prerequisite of human dignity, a prerequisite of freedom, both national and political, as well as a prerequisite of social justice. But democracy cannot go on its own. It is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. We also need economic growth. As a matter of fact, sustainable economic growth. As history has taught us time and again, the collapse of an economy usually leads to the collapse of democracy and the society as a whole. For no democracy can survive chronic social deprivation. We also need social cohesion based on justice and opportunities for all. No democracy can survive a sinking middle class and a rising social turmoil. We also need permanent cultural growth and a common sense of belonging based on morals and aesthetics of human dignity, global harmony, social solidarity, and individual responsibility above all. Democracy requires citizens who constantly try to better understand the world, better understand themselves and their place in the world. Citizens trying to better themselves and to excel among others, both locally and globally. Citizens always trying to surpass poverty, ignorance, and isolation. Citizens reaching to their limits and going beyond their limits. So for democracy to work, societies need to learn how to balance their ambitions with their constraints, their needs with their dreams, their duties with their desires, their limited nature with their unlimited potential, their virtues and their defects, their established beliefs with their drive to question those beliefs. Plato and Aristotle wrote and debated extensively on those questions. Plato, more of an idealist, defined the dialectics of perfection, the quest of the human soul to better on all counts. Aristotle, on the other hand, more of a pragmatist, defined virtue on the dialectics of the middle road, of balancing between opposing extremes, as the quest of the human mind to comprehend the meaning of its existence, cruising between excesses. But dear friends, although we are still at the Acropolis Museum in Athens, we have already transcended antiquity. We have arrived in our contemporary world. I'm sure you understand better than anybody else that referring to the dilemmas I have just mentioned, we are talking about us. We're talking about Europe. We're talking about the epic and the drama, about the historical challenges and the intellectual debates of our modern world. As a matter of fact, we're talking about the elementary questions that drove us to the European integration, about the basic challenges which still define our existence, our soul, and our drive to become the epicenter of world history again. 70 years ago, we emerged out of a devastating war more divided than ever. In the debris of the European societies, we led the foundation of our union. But we were still divided then. We moved cautiously from the customs union to the common market to the single market, to the monetary union. We are moving now cautiously but steadily to the political integration, to the fiscal union, to the banking union. United Europe is not a distant dream anymore. It has built its own legacy, and it is generating its own dynamics. Europe is now more united than ever, more stable than ever, inspiring confidence to its peoples and gaining respect by everybody else for the ideals it represents globally. Europe is a rising world power, benign enough to generate influence everywhere and strong enough to have its interests respected and its voice heard. True, we still have a lot of problems to resolve, but we have already gone far enough, and we are constantly becoming stronger, learning from our mistakes, correcting our defects, and sailing through rough waters with increasing confidence. Today, we're establishing much more than a common framework for our political union. We are gradually building a common sense of belonging, a common identity. We're still different as individual nations, and we will probably remain so forever. Different, yes, but divided, never again. However, continuously more integrated vis-à-vis the rest of the world. This is the first and most important, I believe, step of building a common identity, when everyone will identify us as one Europe, and when we will learn to look outside our limits from our common European perspective. What is the basis of this developing European identity? It is the same values, principles, ideas, and ideals I started talking about tonight. The ones that cast their shadow all around us. Freedom, democracy, extraversion, human dignity, opportunities for all, solidarity to all, responsibility by all, and above all, relentless fight against tyranny. Idealism, pragmatism, humane moral standards, the constant quest for perfection, resolving disputes through mutual concessions based on the rule of law, embracing modesty, but never giving in to intimidation, holding high aspirations, but never excusing arrogance, proud for what we have achieved, but also compassionate for our fellow citizens or our fellow humans that are needy or poor or not so lucky as others. This is the profile of our new Europe. This is why the United Europe is so intricately connected with this place. It is not geography alone. It is not history alone. It is our common cultural ties that define all of us and bind us all together. 4 years ago, Greece found itself in a severe crisis. There were widespread fears then that such a crisis could become devastating, and not only for Greece itself, that it could spread out of Greece and seriously damage our union. We heard all kinds of doomsday scenario about the so-called unavoidable collapse of Greece, about the so-called unavoidable collapse of our monetary union, and maybe the European Union itself. We proved them wrong big time. Yes, the numbers were not on our side. The macroeconomic dynamics were not on our side, but our solidarity proved stronger than the naked numbers. Our potential proved much more than could be registered by simple accounting. Our deep commitment to democracy, to progress, to European integration proved much stronger than the superficial predictions based on models. The Greeks proved much different from the stereotypes about them and against them. And with our sacrifices, we turned our economy around. We achieved the largest fiscal adjustment ever at the shortest period of time. But we also suffered the biggest GDP loss in peacetime ever. We have suffered a lot and are still suffering, but our economy is now turning around. Our society has held together. Our democracy has withstood all the pressures. We have delivered, and we are moving ahead. What is the morale of the story? The morale is that success will and can only go to countries which encourage individual initiative and enterprise, not to the ones which attempt to diminish them. And Greece has by now become one of those countries. Our partners have helped us indeed. They have proved that solidarity is not just a nice word in our union. It is the cornerstone of our united Europe. And you, all of you in this gathering tonight, have played the most crucial role for this solidarity to materialize. We Greeks have turned a painful crisis to an opportunity to change our country and relish our potential. We Europeans have turned a trying moment for our union to an opportunity to correct past mistakes and to rectify the defects of our institutions. All Europeans may now be more interdependent, but at the same time we are more independent from the need to constantly borrow. We are standing on our feet. We are unleashing our potential. We are in a much better shape to compete worldwide. We are getting more effective in securing our borders and developing our own energy resources. And we do so as Europeans without the need to erect any greater external protection, because we know that our approach to world trade is consistent with the liberalization we preach at home. We still have a lot to do. We have a long way to go. But as Europeans, we're now much more confident, much more self-reliant, and self-assured than we were ever before. We are winning this battle. We have defeated the worst part of ourselves. We have opened the best prospects for our future, for our common future. What you see around you, ladies and gentlemen, all these monuments and symbols, stretching to all directions, is not just history. It is inspiration for our common future of freedom, democracy, compassion, social justice, extroversion, prosperity for all, opportunities for all, responsibility by all. It is also inspiration for a relentless fight against tyranny, inscribed on those magnificent marble sculptures, inscribed in our history, inscribed in our souls, inscribed in our destiny and in our future. In a seminal Greek tragedy, the hero warns that the bundle of sticks is hard to break. This is exactly what all of us today also believe, that a united Europe, like a bundle of states, firmly held together by their common democratic conscience and solidarity for one another, can stand up to any challenge. This is what our common future is all about. This is what Parthenon, just across the street, is all about. Not just a monument of our glorious past, but a beacon for our common future. And by the way, this is not idealism, this is pragmatism. Because when you are trying to better yourself against all odds, when you are fighting an uphill battle and start gaining ground, when you are making sacrifices that start to pay off, when you believe in yourself and manage to prove yourself, you are a pragmatist. Pragmatism is not about accepting your ill fate. Pragmatism is about shaping up a brighter future. 50 years ago, the United Europe was an idealistic dream, or that was the conventional wisdom of the time. 4 years ago, my country was falling apart, and our monetary union was also on the verge of collapse, or that was the conventional wisdom of the time. Now a better and more stronger Greece is emerging out of the crisis, and our union is also getting better and stronger than ever. So pragmatism is not about accepting your fate. It is knowing your limits, going to the limits and even managing to expand your limits, your degrees of freedom, your prospects, and to do so decisively, but with prudence, boldly and fearlessly, but with no arrogance, making sure you count all the numbers correctly, but always with respect to the real people, to their feelings, to their needs, to their potential. This synthesis of idealism and pragmatism, of aesthetic perception, perfection and rationality, this constant balancing between formidable challenges for the human mind and the undiscovered potential of the human soul is our source of inspiration. And what is the symbol of all these? You can see it just across the street. Look at the Acropolis. From our common past, we can see our common future, and it works. Thank you very much.